take the world by storm.
Alright guys, so I hope you are ready for one exciting book review. It's exciting for me because I get to talk about one of my favorite series, or at least this is the beginning of one of my favorite series. So a little background, Terrier by Tamora Pierce. If you are unfamiliar with the genius that is Tamora Pierce, let me give you a brief overview. It starts in about the mid to late 80s, in which she came out with her Song of the Lioness Quartet, which actually started as a single book. And I don't know, her agent, her publisher, someone was like, you know what, let's cut it up. So it got cut into 4. And yes, it stars Alana the Lioness. She is the genesis of this entire series. So even though this trilogy I'm about to get into comes before Alana, there are just some aspects of it that wouldn't mean the same thing if you had never read the Song of the Lioness Quartet. So it's kind of up to you. Do you want to start chronologically with the Beka Cooper series, or would you rather start where Pierce started with Alana? You can't go wrong either way. But if you really kind of want to get all the little like Easter eggs, I would say start with Alana, dive into the Wolf Speaker, then do Trickster's Choice, Trickster's Queen, or you could do Beka. But because Trickster's Choice, Trickster's Queen follows Alana's daughter, I just kind of think it goes along those lines. So yes, Alana, Wolf Speaker, Tricksters, and then do Beka Cooper. And then, once you've loved them enough, do it chronologically. The thing is, her writing just gets better and better, so it almost might be a letdown if you started with the Beka Cooper series, because as much as I love Alana and then its successor, the Wolf Speaker Quartet, they just are not the same caliber of writing. And so if you went from Beka Cooper to Alana to Wolf Speaker, you would just be like, not quite the same. What happened to the writing? Because it almost goes from here to here. And this is coming from someone who loves the stories, but honestly, if you read her earlier series, there's just a world of difference. It just comes from maturity and experience. But I digress. Beka Cooper starts, okay, where do I begin? Where do I begin? Going back to Alana a little bit, right? The whole premise with Alana is that she wants to be a knight, but as a female, she's supposed to, I think it's supposed to become like, not a nun, she's supposed to go to convent to learn how to use magic or something. Considering how many times I've read this series, I should know, but what you gonna do? She wants to be a knight. And there have been no female knights in like 100 years or so. But she and her brother, her twin brother, switch places. He goes to study magic. She takes his place to become a knight. And while she is at the palace learning to become a knight, she meets the king of the rogue, and that is George Cooper. In the beginning of this Beka Cooper trilogy, we see George Cooper as a child, and his mother is like, my kid is going down the wrong path, so I need to set him straight. The only way I can do that is to tell him about our ancestor, Beka Cooper. So that is the opening, and that is kind of what gives you the warm fuzzies when you open up with a character that you already know. And so she goes on to tell about Beka Cooper. So the whole story about Beka Cooper is she wants to be a dog. And a dog is the equivalent of this realm's police force. Terrier details her puppy year, in which she gets paired with the best dog team in the lower city, and that would be Clary Goodwin and Matthias Tunstall. They never get a puppy. And the thing, like, some of Beka's past is she grew up in what was the equivalent of the slums. And her mom was dating this really bad dude who was part of this really bad gang. It's like really notorious gang that everybody was trying to find. And so then they find out that her mother is ill. And the boyfriend is like, all right, I'm going to beat you up. I'm going to steal from you. And then I'm going to get out of here. And Beka's like, nobody treats my mama like that. Nobody puts baby in the corner. So she dogs this dude. And she finds the hideout of this gang, and then she tells the highest authority because nobody else will listen to her. The gang gets rounded up, and then Beka and her family get taken in by Lord Gershom and essentially fostered by him. And so he is kind of the head of the police force, these dogs. And so she, not only is she kind of like a natural at it, but she sort of grew up in that umbrella and she just loves it. So despite the fact that she could have any district in the entire realm, she wants the slums. She wants the lower city. And so she gets placed with Clary and Tunstall, and I just like to think it was Lord Gershom pulling some strings because he knows Beka deserves the best. In any case, they walk her through her first year of being a dog, her puppy training. And the premise of this novel is, well, there's really two. So there is the shadow snake, and then there are these people who keep going missing, and we have to figure out who is this shadow snake and why are these people going missing and where are they. Something very unusual about Beka, there's a lot of magic in this book. Well, actually not as much magic in this book as is in the Song of the Lioness and the Wolf Speaker series, but Beka can basically communicate with the dead. And she does that via the spirits that ride Pigeonback. And, this isn't really so much as communicating with the dead, but there are dust spinners around the city. And if she stands in the dust spinner, she can hear bits and pieces of conversation. So these are her birdies. These are her informants, and she uses them to help solve the mysteries. And I just cannot get over how creative Tamora Pierce is. As I said, these don't deal with as much magic as you'll get in her later series, and I kind of like that. Like, it's a nice departure. It's still there, but it's just a really nice departure, and it really depends. It relies on Beka's innate ability to dog people, to hound them, to catch them. Early on in her puppy training, Beka makes some friends. There's Erskine, who is also a puppy. There is Vereen, who is also a puppy. There's a guy named Phelan, who I think he's a second-year dog. And then she meets Rosto the Piper, Aniki, I can't pronounce her last name, and Cora. And so they are like on the other side of the law, but within this realm, like sometimes those people are just necessary. So even though Beka and her crew are on the right side of the law, like they're still friends with these people. And so, eventually they all just become one big happy family, and they just start, having breakfast together and this and that. And then Beka, she also has a cat named Pounce, who, if you know the Alana series, Pounce is very familiar to you because Pounce is Alana's faithful. So it's just one more way that we're tying so many different aspects of her world together. But Pounce is actually a constellation. He's a purple-eyed cat, and so he kind of like helps guide Beka and, keeps her out of trouble and this and that and the other. And so as she's going through her puppy training, she is, chasing after a bad guy, and she falls face first into like fish muck. So she becomes Fish Puppy, and it's just a great mortification to her because she's a serious dog. Like, she's serious about dog work. And so by the end of the novel, she's able to redeem herself and rename herself as a terrier because of her efforts in capturing the shadow snake and figuring out what's going on with these diggers. We're gonna get into some spoilers, so buckle your seatbelts. It's gonna be a funky ride. Well, not really, but there you go. So let's start with the diggers. As I said, Beka started in the lower city, and so now that she's back in the lower city, she's kind of back in communication with one of her oldest friends, a girl named Tansy, and Tansy has married up. I mean, I guess as up as a lower city mott can marry, and so she married the grandson of, like, the local mob boss, so his name is Crookshank, and what has happened is Tansy's, like, 2-year-old son has been murdered. And they kind of intertwine. So what we find out is that Roland had been murdered by the shadow snake. And this is what gets Beka involved in that storyline. But back to Crookshank and Tansy. So, Crookshank, he's one of those guys who he kind of owns a bunch of tenement buildings, and he charges people a buku of rent to live in crap, and everybody hates him. What we find out is that he had found a vein in the basement of one of his buildings of fire opals, and so he had been hiring locals to come dig, and then he would kill them so that nobody knows about his newfound wealth. So that is the deal with the diggers, is it was Crookshank behind it all. But now with the shadow snake, we're like, who is the shadow snake? Because it is a myth. It is something from a child's story that has then been brought to life. And as soon as Beka hears about the shadow snake, she's like, I mean, obviously she thinks it's a child's tale too, but then Tansy points out all of these people who had lost children, because it's like what the shadow snake does is they take a child, they have a ransom demand, and they're either paid or they're not paid. And so Tansy's like, look, they got it, they got it, they got it, they got it. Then Beka goes to her dogs and she's like, please tell me you've been doing something about this. And they're like, what were we to do? It's a child's tale. Do you know how many kids go missing in the city? Like, we can't investigate everything. Well, obviously, she talks them into it, and we learn that the shadow snake is, major spoiler here, the shadow snake is the local baker, or bakeress, since it's a woman. And what had happened is the woman, there had been another local woman, like a local mage, who had a necklace, and she was like, why should that woman have the necklace? I want the necklace. And so there is our first shadow snake abduction, and then she realizes, you know what? I could use this to my advantage. So she enlists her son, and I guess some of her son's friends. And so over the course of like 3 years, she frightens people into getting what she wants. And sometimes they pay up, sometimes they don't. I feel like most times they don't. Beka, as she's putting pieces together, she assumes it is the baker's son. And just because he's a big dude, he's kind of an idiot, he's not really nice. And then she realizes, actually, it's the mother. And then, in terms of Tansy's son going missing or being killed, Beka deduces the shadow snake would have killed him anyways, because Mistress Knoll didn't like Tansy, because as they were growing up, Tansy would steal from her, and she's essentially taking money out of Mistress Knoll's mouth, right? And so, Beka's like, look, Tansy, I hate to break it to you, but your kid would have been dead either way. But, over the course of the novel, like, the shadow snake keeps demanding opals from Crookshank, and he thinks it's basically the rival mob boss, like the current rogue, and so he's not paying up. So Roland is killed, and then his grandson, Tansy's husband, is kidnapped, and Tansy's like, I can't even handle this. Like, please tell me I'm not going to lose my son and my husband. Beka, do something. So, yes, Beka deduces, she gets the answers, she solves the mystery, and everything is okie dokie in the end. I know that doesn't sound super exciting, but this novel, like, Tamora Pierce is so detailed, we would be here for an exceptionally long time. I will say I have no cons. One slight con, like, okay, I gotta say, this is one of the best audiobooks I have ever heard. The Lioness and Wolf Speaker ones, on the other hand, not so much. Like, honestly, do not waste your time listening to those series. Just read it, okay? But this one is fantastic. My only issue, Beka, she's not a girly girl, right? She is hardcore. And sometimes the narrator makes her sound a little bit too feminine, a little bit too gentle. And I'm like, is that really how Beka would say something? Is that really how she would come across? So on the grand scheme of things, it's not a big deal. But because I have listened to these books like a dozen times, eventually you do start to think about those things. But in the beginning, you just get caught up in this tale. You know, there's a little bit of telling, but largely it's all show. And Pierce just does a fantastic job at world building. You feel like you're there. There's so much grit. You know, the pacing is fantastic. The characters are so well rounded. I just can't say enough good things. Like Beka, you know, nobody ever has it easy. Even though she's the protagonist, she never has it easy, because even though, like, she had been fostered by Lord Gershom, she grew up in a household where his wife hated her because she, in a sense, encouraged his love of the dogs, and she didn't think that was appropriate. She thought he needed to have a job more befitting to his stature, and so, you know, every time Beka goes home, it's like she's not allowed to see her brothers and sisters because she's an embarrassment. Lady Gershom, she's just really mean to Beka, but at the same time, etiquette dictates that Beka need to see her, like, interact with her, be like, yes, I'm here visiting, and blah-de-blah-de-blah, and, you know, it's just, you know, every good comes with a bad, and it all just really balances out so well. Even, like, the birds. So, Beka has a couple regulars, and one of those regulars is Slapper. And he's basically a crack-knob bird. You don't really think he's all the way there. You know, he has a club foot. And he's just so mean to Beka. So you think, oh, okay, so she, like, feeds some birds and she hears some ghosts. Oh, no, like, Slapper will come at her and he just beats up on her. And you're like, okay. It's just the little things that make the big things. A slight spoiler, there's a moment in the book where there's this big celebratory night. You know how we have certain holidays that we celebrate on certain days in certain ways, and so they have one of these holidays that they're all celebrating, and it turns out that Vereen ends up dying. And in that, Phelan, who she had been in a relationship with, is like, what's the point in being a dog if people are gonna die like this, like a needless, senseless death? So then he actually joins the other side. And what I really love is, so Pierce, as I've mentioned, she's already started tying things into other books. And Phelan had been a scent hound handler, so he was handling a dog named Achu. And then Achu becomes a major player in the next 2 books. She starts to weave in, to drop some breadcrumbs, kind of leave some hints of things that are to come. Like, she talks a little about coalmongering, and then coalmongering is essentially the plot of the next book. But it doesn't feel forced. This one feels like these points are just naturally there. They are not intended for further use, and I like that. I like that nothing in this series feels forced. It's all incredibly natural. Let's talk. I mean, this is gets to be real short and quick because sister's got to go to bed. Let's start with Clary and Tunstall. I mean, I don't really have so much to say about them, except that they're fantastic. But, you know, again, this is one thing I loved about how Pierce tied everything together. So in this first novel, we get to see both of them. We get a taste of them, we get to know them a little bit, and then in the next one, Bloodhound, we get to see Goodwin. And then in the third one, Mastiff, we get to see Tunstall. And so I really love how we start as a unit, and then we just break off. So yes, Beka is still the main character, but we're able to get to know her partners better just because of circumstances. I mean, and that might not seem like a big deal to you in the long run. It's really not a big deal, but I just thought it was really clever. It's just so natural how it was just like, well, in this book, we're not gonna have Tunstall. And in this book, we're just not gonna have Goodwin. Pierce never tries to force more than we need into a book. I just think they just balance each other out so well, and they're just a perfect balanced pair for Beka to learn with. And I mean, how many times can I say I love something? I can say it again and again. You don't really want to hear it, so we will move on. I touched on the writing a little bit, and I don't really know how many of you actually understand what I mean when I talk about the more technical aspects of books. So I'm going to try and be as layman as possible, but I just wanted to talk about the mystery, or mysteries, in this book, because again, they just feel so natural. The way that they unfold, it just makes sense. Like, yes, obviously, A leads to B leads to C. Like, I mean, how is it that we even get into? I think what happened is that one morning, Beka heard her birdies. You know, the pigeons came to visit her, and they had the ghosts, and so she heard the voices of these diggers. And so she's like, there's a mystery there. And then you meet Tansy, and, you know, Tansy's son has died. And so then that just kind of snowballs into Beka learning there's a bigger mystery at play. And so it's, again, her just dogging. She's doing her work, trying to figure out who is behind all the things going on in the lower city, while still trying not to get killed, while trying to survive her puppy year. I cannot emphasize enough how important, not in this case, realism, but a natural progression is to me. I do not understand how writers get away with making ridiculous leaps and bounds to the end, or when you can sort of see the plotting. You can see the breadcrumbs, the little things that are being dropped. Like here, you honestly don't know who the culprit is. Like with Crookshank, Beka suspects him early on. And so that's not really the mystery. The mystery really is, where are the diggers? When is the next set of diggers going to be hired and killed? So that's really, you know, it with that. But it's also like, well, what does Crookshank have that the Shadow Snake wants? How did Crookshank find these fire opals? It's basically asking all the right questions to create a mystery. But honestly, I think the Shadow Snake is the one that stands out head and shoulders above everything, because there are no clues. I mean, except for the fact that, yes, Mistress Knoll, the baker, is featured heavily, but a lot of characters are featured heavily. Beka is featured, Tansy, Goodwin, Tunstall, Rosto the Piper. Like, there's so many characters who make so many appearances that there's no reason to suspect that Mistress Knoll, of all people, like, yes, her son, not a nice dude. So automatically, let's just say he's the culprit, because why would a nice lady who gives them free food be the bad guy? Loved these mysteries. I mean, even though I know the answers, I still really enjoy moving through it with them, because that natural progression, it's so captivating. Like, you just can't step away. I would love to see her rewrite her Alana and her Wolf Speaker quartets, knowing what she knows now about writing. Because with the Alana series, it was supposed to be one book. She was told, let's cut it into 4. And so you can see how they could all be one book. But again, you can also see how she just doesn't have enough time to fully develop her plots. So in a sense, they almost need to be separate books, and so that they can each develop their own plot. And so in that case, it makes the stories a little unsatisfying. So I would love to see her redo them with the maturity that she has gained with 30 years of writing. Hands down, love this series, or this trilogy. I can't tell you which one I like the most, because they're all so intricately plotted. Their pacing is all just so fantastic. And if you don't know what pacing is, have you ever run? Like, have you ever started out super fast and then gotten really worn out really fast? Or, you start out slow and you build, right? So pacing is just about how they bring the story to you, how quickly the important parts of the story happen. Does everything happen too fast so that you feel like you're racing the whole time and you never get to catch your breath? And in hers, I just feel like she always has big moments, and then she gives you a little breath of fresh air. But still, it doesn't get boring, because it's almost like when she leaves off with one plot line, she'll just pick up with the next one, and so you're never wishing or missing anything, unless of course you prefer one plot line to another, and then you're just like, I wish they'd get back to the Shadow Snake, or I wish we'd get back to the Diggers. But even within those, we have the subplots that just keep pushing us forward, and I can't get enough. I was not wanting to read this series so soon, but I gave in to temptation. Oh, excuse me, I'm so tired. I hope you enjoyed this review. I give it 2 enthusiastic thumbs up. If you get my reference, holla in the comments. And yes, please, go check out the audiobook, go buy the book, do what you need to do, and I will see you next time for Bloodhound. Bye.